Hey everyone, Off the Mic Sports Network. It's been a while. A lot of stuff going on. We've had an election. We've had college football playoff rankings. We've had a bunch of shit going on. We had a World Series winner. I've been very sporadic and doing a lot of videos. I've been very busy. But I wanted to, bring back the channel here with this because I do a West Coast based football show called the West Coast Best Coast Football Show, and I'm hoping to bring that back this week. Just a lot of stuff going on. A lot of crazy stuff going on the West Coast. Really, Oregon is the class of, college football, but it's not by much. But the college football playoff rankings have come out for 2 weeks now. And here we go. We're already starting to complain about shit when everybody needs to fundamentally understand that, all of this is just theater. All of this is just to drum up the drama, usually with the exception to some degree of last year with Florida State getting left out of the playoff. All of this sorts itself out. And with 12 teams getting in and with just a clusterfuck of teams in the SEC, everything is going to play itself out. Nobody is going to get screwed here. But I need to point this out right off the top with this college football, centric post that's really national as opposed to my West Coast base, which is more of where my background is. But I do have a background in the Big Ten. I do cover the Big Ten. I have covered the Big Ten. My family has a lot of lineage in Ohio, a lot of alums at Ohio State. So I know this conference. And the disrespect that has gotten shown about this league just because they have 18 teams and the unbalanced scheduling because you wanted to realign the whole thing. What do you want? Indiana is getting so much disrespect like they're some sort of schlub team. Just because Indiana hasn't been good in football for a long time doesn't mean that they don't belong in the top 5 here. They're one of the best teams in America. And they played their first really, truly tough game of the season. They've been blowing people out. And if you're not playing a tough schedule, you need to blow teams out. And Indiana has been bludgeoning people. I saw them for a half against UCLA. UCLA was not nearly the team they are now. I understand that. But they took it to UCLA for a half. It was not close. And what Kirk Cignetti has done with what was predominantly known as a basketball school to get them to 10-0, and literally they played their biggest game maybe in school history in 2 weeks on the big noon kickoff at the Horseshoe against Ohio State. And if they win that game, they've only got Purdue left on their schedule, and they're beating Purdue because Purdue is awful. They're one of the worst teams in the Power Four. So Indiana could conceivably go 12-0 and go to the Big Ten championship game. Indianapolis, by the way. And people still don't want to give this team any respect whatsoever because they haven't played anybody. Who gives a shit? Who gives a shit? Alabama's playing fucking Mercer this week. What are we talking about here? Just because your favorite school or just because ESPN has a contract with the SEC doesn't mean that you have to downplay what Indiana has accomplished this season. And yeah, Oregon, best win of the season because they've beaten the number 2 team. Ohio State's only loss of the season at number 2. There's a reason why those two are 1-2. If you want to have a conversation and go SEC against Big Ten, what the fuck is Texas doing at 3? When Texas has beaten nobody. Texas, if you want to do this with Texas's best win is Vanderbilt, who hasn't been ranked in the CFP rankings. Yet for some reason, South Carolina popped in because SEC love. Indiana's beaten Michigan. And yeah, Texas beat Michigan by a lot more on the road. I understand that. But what's different in Texas's resume to Indiana's? Indiana has one less loss. They're undefeated. So Texas has done nothing. Nothing. And they are deemed the class of the SEC right now because everybody else in their conference has lost more than one game this season. And they're conceivably in the driver's seat to go to the SEC championship game, but they got to face Texas A&M at the end of the year. So Penn State, Penn State's always kind of been a fraudulent team. What their best wins against UCLA and USC, and then they're hanging on to that one loss that they had against Ohio State. But it's just like the disrespect that is being shown, because the outrage really with these rankings this past week is that Georgia fell all the way from 3 to 12, and because of the funky formatting, Georgia would not be in the playoff if it started today. But all you Georgia fans, you can calm down. You're facing Tennessee this week. I don't think Tennessee's very good. I think Georgia's going to knock Tennessee out of the playoffs. So I think everybody needs to calm down. This is all going to sort itself out. BYU, 9-0. A lot of controversy about, that game against Utah with that controversial pass interference call where their athletic director, or it was a holding call, defensive holding on a 4th down. And then it was so bad that Mark Harlan, the athletic director of Utah, and by the way, I have some thoughts about that I might bring back with the West Coast, Best Coast football show in regards to how Mark Harlan handled that situation. BYU's undefeated. And there's not a whole hell of a lot left in front of them with the rest of the Big 12, beating each other up. They could conceivably be in the Big 12 title game and need one win to get to the college football playoff. Colorado is right there too. They're all the way down at 17, but Colorado's really got nothing in front of them the rest of the way either. So they could conceivably find a way to get to the Big 12 title game as well. So it's just like all this stuff is going to sort itself out. Boise, they're in the driver's seat to have that Group of 5 championship berth, or the auto Group of 5 spot, because unless they slip up down the stretch here. Washington State's right on their tail. Army could potentially be in the mix as well. If they're able to get a big win against Notre Dame, which who's to say that doesn't happen. So SMU at 14 is very interesting. This is the one thing that, if you're going to be mad about something in this college football playoff rankings, why the hell is Miami 9? Why is Miami 9? Miami just lost to Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech is not very good. They're a better team than people give them credit for, but Georgia Tech, and let me pull this up here for a second, because Georgia Tech right now is, they lost to, they got blown out by Notre Dame. Georgia Tech is 6-4 this season. They're a middle of the road to, middle to bottom tier team in the ACC. Let's call it what it is. Miami lost to them. Miami lost to them. Miami's done nothing this season to warrant being a top 10 team right now with that loss to Georgia Tech. At least Texas can say, hey, we lost at home to Georgia. We lost at home to Georgia. Penn State, we lost to Ohio State. Notre Dame and Miami are the two schools that are really hanging on by a thread. Notre Dame has beaten some good teams, at least. They beat Texas A&M on the road to start the season. But yeah, they lost to Northern Illinois, which is a bad loss. But Miami, what the hell have they done? They're in a bad ACC. They haven't played Clemson. They beat Florida State. Florida State's terrible. They beat Florida. Florida's not a good SEC team. They're kind of middling team. They've got no wins of note. They barely beat Virginia Tech on a Hail Mary that wasn't. They escaped against Cal. I was high on Cal before the season, but Cal has faltered. Miami has done nothing this season. So if there's one team to be really mad about in these rankings, it's not Indiana. It's not Penn State. It's not one of the Big Ten teams. They've warranted that. If you want to be mad at something, be mad at Miami, who was the ACC's ticket really into the playoff. And now the ACC's only got one shot to get there. If SMU stays clear, they're gonna you're gonna get an auto bid, whether it's SMU or it's Miami. One of those two is gonna get in to the playoff. But yeah, it's just all this talk about 2-loss SEC teams getting in. Maybe it'd be 3-loss SEC teams. Look, this playoff was designed for more access, but at the same time, the regular season does need to matter to some degree. And all of these SEC teams have beaten each other up. Yes, is the Big Ten a little bit top-heavy? Sure. But at the same time, your two best teams, 1 and 2, they played each other, and it was a 1-point game at Autzen Stadium that Ohio State might have won. The number 4 team in your rankings, Penn State, lost at home when they couldn't score an offensive touchdown against Ohio State. And it was a 1-score game. Indiana has beaten everybody on their schedule by double digits or more, or even like by more than 2 touchdowns or 2 scores. Every single one of them, except Michigan this past week. And Michigan, even though they're a 5-loss team, they play really tough games. I just don't understand why we need to down some of the accomplishments of some of these schools that we've never seen at this level. Why are we treating Indiana like they're Cincinnati or they're like, some middling group of 5 school? They play in the Big Ten. They play in the Big Ten, which is one of the best conferences in America. Just because you don't like that or because you work for ESPN or whatever doesn't mean that you need to diminish what they're doing. They're number 5 in the rankings for a reason. And even if they lose to Ohio State by a couple of scores and they get to 11-1, they're going to the playoff. Stop trying to set up this narrative that somehow Indiana's not going to make it. They've earned the right to be in this spot. And just because a bunch of SEC teams have already lost 2 games doesn't mean that you need to downplay Indiana being undefeated because they haven't played a ranked team yet. They beat everybody by significantly large margins. That's what you need to do when you don't have a very superior schedule. It's not their fault. They're playing the teams in front of them. If there was a different logo next to Indiana, if it was the Ohio State logo, Indiana would probably be, much more well thought of. But because they're Indiana and they haven't been good in football very much for the course of their history, and my guy Rhett Lewis can attest to this, doesn't mean that you need to diminish their accomplishments and what Kurt Cignetti has done for the Hoosiers in Bloomington. So those are my thoughts on the college football playoff. We'll have a lot more on this, a lot of West Coast-based stuff to talk about what Oregon's done. Also, we'll talk about BYU and Boise State on the West Coast, Best Coast Football Show. An interesting game also between USC and Nebraska that I'm going to be at the Coliseum this weekend. Nebraska making some changes to their offensive staff. USC making changes at quarterback in what's been a completely lost season. UCLA is starting to play really good football. I was very wrong about Deshaun Foster. And Colorado, man, I'll get out of here with this and tease you for what I'm going to do on the show. I think Colorado's going to the playoff, man. And I think it's good for the sport. You may not like Colorado. I don't like a lot of what Colorado represents. But that's good for college football in the first iteration of the 12-team playoff that we might get Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter, and Deion Sanders in the college football playoff. Potentially in an on-campus game at Boulder, potentially, depending on how this whole thing shakes out. It could be, they get a bye into a bowl game. And that's incredible for Deion Sanders with Colorado that won 4 games last year. They're 7-2, and they could conceivably finish at 10-2 and go to the Big 12 title game. And I think they would beat BYU in that scenario. BYU has been skating by their TCU from 2 years ago. So, but yeah, I'll talk a lot about that going into the weekend. It's going to be really interesting to see how this whole thing shakes out in the final month of the season here of college football. But I'll talk to you guys real soon. Bye-bye.